So how exactly do you control an empire of millions? It's a massive question, right? When we think of ancient Rome, our minds usually go straight to the endless legions, the strict laws, and these brutal frontier battles. But honestly, managing the restless, volatile, and heavily divided population right there in the heart of the capital, that was a totally different beast. You couldn't just use military might to keep millions of angry citizens in line. The solution they came up with was actually brutally simple, even if pulling it off was incredibly complex. It came down to bread, circuses, and a whole lot of concrete. The Roman emperors figured out pretty quickly that the best way to pacify a demanding public wasn't through brute force. It was through the absolute weaponization of entertainment. And to do that on an imperial scale, well, they needed a machine, a monument that could captivate, feed, and control 50,000 screaming people all at once. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to bypass the Hollywood myths, the blood, the sand, the typical gladiator stories, and instead, we're going to decode the greatest political pacifier ever built, the Roman Colosseum. Because this wasn't just a sports arena. It was a massive propaganda engine, a masterclass in social engineering, and quite literally an architectural miracle. As you'll see, you're never going to look at a modern stadium the same way again. Okay, let's dive into how this behemoth actually came to be, because the context here is absolutely crucial. Back in 64 CE, a devastating fire just completely leveled huge chunks of Rome. And Emperor Nero, being Nero, decides to just seize all that prime real estate for himself. Fast forward a bit, Nero dies, the empire completely spirals into chaos, and a general named Vespasian finally seizes power in 69 CE. The guy desperately needs to win over a public that is utterly sick of their rulers. So in 70 CE, he kicks off construction on the Colosseum. And incredibly, just 10 years later, the doors open. Which brings us to the politics of spectacle, or what we can honestly call the ultimate propaganda pivot. Vespasian and his son Titus didn't just build this for fun. They were literally rewriting history. Think about what was on that land before. Nero had built his Golden Palace, a sprawling, insanely luxurious private estate that even featured a massive artificial lake right in the middle of downtown Rome. It was built on land stolen from the citizens, and it was a massive slap in the face. So what does Vespasian do? He brilliantly drains that hated private lake and drops the Colosseum right on top of it. He took a despised tyrant's selfish playground and turned it into a massive public venue. It was a genius move. Boom, instant legitimacy. He gave the heart of Rome back to the Romans. But, of course, having a brilliant political idea is one thing. Actually building it, that is an engineering masterpiece. Seriously, just look at this number. 8 years. That's how long the core construction took before they started adding the finishing touches. It's just mind-blowing. We have to remember, they didn't have diesel cranes or computer modeling. They built a 50,000-seat stadium that was actually taller than the Statue of Liberty from base to torch in less than a decade. It was the ultimate flex of Roman organization, relying on tens of thousands of workers, enslaved people, and brilliant engineers working in perfect sync. So how on earth did they pull that off? Well, it was a masterclass in supply chain logistics. They quarried roughly 240,000 cartloads of solid travertine stone from a town 20 miles away. For the inner walls, they smartly switched to lightweight volcanic tuff and their famous Roman concrete so they could build these soaring, beautiful arches. But here's the real secret. The foundation. Because they were building on the swampy, muddy bottom of Nero's drained lake, they had to dig down and pour a 12-meter thick ring of solid concrete. Without that hidden foundation, the whole thing would have just sunk straight into the mud. Now, here's a detail I absolutely love. The Romans didn't just want you trapped in there, they wanted you comfortable. Sitting under the blazing Mediterranean sun for 8 hours? No thanks. So they designed the velarium. It was a massive, retractable cloth awning that worked just like the rigging on a ship. And who knows ship rigging better than sailors? They actually brought in 240 active-duty sailors from the Roman Navy to work the complex winches and pulleys, constantly adjusting the shade as the sun moved. How crazy is that? Let's peel back the curtain a bit and head downstairs to the hypogeum. This was the dark, mechanical heart of the whole operation. Added a few years after the grand opening by Emperor Domitian, this underground area was basically a horrifying backstage. The stagecraft was incredible, though. First, teams of enslaved workers would endlessly push these heavy, four-armed wooden capstans. As they walked in circles, thick ropes would wind through this crazy maze of pulleys. That tension would suddenly pull open a hidden trapdoor on the sandy floor above, and boom, a caged leopard or a gladiator would just magically appear out of thin air. And they were doing this with dozens of lifts all at the same time. But while the crowd up top is cheering at the magic trick, the reality down in the hypogeum was literally a waking nightmare. It was a dark, twisting labyrinth. It was deafeningly loud from grinding gears and roaring, starving animals. There was practically no ventilation, so it was freezing in the winter and sweltering in the summer. It must have just reeked of exotic animals, sweat, and absolute fear. Hundreds of people were trapped down there coordinating this horrific ballet in the dark just so the emperor could look like a god in the light. Let's head back upstairs, because the seating itself was quite literally a social order set in stone. The whole arena was basically a physical map of Rome's incredibly strict class system. They had 76 numbered public gates to get people in quickly, but once you were inside, it was fiercely segregated. Right down at the bottom, closest to the blood and the action, sat the senators and the absolute elite. Move up to the middle tiers and you find the knights and wealthy citizens. And way up at the top, squinting to see what's happening, were the poor plebeians, the women, and the enslaved people. You didn't just grab a seat. Your ticket was dictated by exactly who you were in society. Archaeologist Valerie Higgins really hit the nail on the head here. She notes that going to the games was a socially reinforcing act. Think about it. It's a 360-degree bowl. You aren't just watching the gladiators. You are actively watching everyone else. The poor are looking down, literally, at the immense wealth of the elite. The elite are looking up, seeing the thousands of masses they control. It was the ultimate panopticon. Everyone was constantly reminded exactly where they stood. Which brings us to a really fascinating visual mystery: the missing half. If you've ever seen a picture of the Colosseum or visited Rome, you know half the outer wall is just gone. Why? Well, it actually comes back to the fatal flaw of Vespasian's brilliant PR stunt. Remember how he built it over Nero's lake? Well, the north side of the building actually sat on solid natural limestone, which is why it survived perfectly. But the south side? It was built on the squishy, unstable sediment from that drained lake. When a massive earthquake rocked Rome in 1349, that unstable ground jelloed, and the entire southern half of the outer wall just catastrophically collapsed into a mountain of rubble. But here's the crazy part. Those thousands of tons of fallen stone didn't just disappear. For centuries, Renaissance builders looked at that rubble and saw a super convenient free quarry. Lime burners and popes hauled away all that gorgeous travertine and marble. The stones of the Colosseum were literally used to build the new face of Rome. We're talking the foundations of St. Peter's Basilica, the Palazzo Venezia, the Palazzo Barberini, and even the flood walls along the Tiber River. The Roman Empire's greatest monument was quite literally disassembled to build the Renaissance. To wrap this all up, historian Paul Pattison makes a brilliant point. He says these buildings were about spreading the idea of the Roman way. You see, the Colosseum wasn't a one-off. The Romans built over 230 mini versions of it all across their empire, from rainy Britain to the deserts of North Africa. There were relentless, brilliant propaganda engines. They were designed to all conquered people into thinking, hey, maybe being Roman isn't so bad, while simultaneously reinforcing absolute imperial power. So think about it. The Colosseum built the Roman Empire by keeping the masses entertained and in check. But when it fell, its literal stones built the Renaissance. It really makes you look at our own modern megastadiums and entertainment complexes in a totally different light, doesn't it? What kind of society are we reinforcing today? And honestly, what will our stadiums build in 2,000 years? Thank you so much for joining me on today's Explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.